The Spin-off Podcast Network.
This is Kiwi is back for a brand new season with more inspiring kōrero from special guests, including amputee, mum and wellbeing advocate Jess Quinn.
I'm most confident that I can get through almost anything. It doesn't mean that I nail it every time, but I am very confident I can overcome almost anything.
And musician, creative and content creator Taylor Roche.
I feel like big dreams always get challenged all the time, especially when you're doing something that's not traditional.
Listen to the new season of This is Kiwi, brought to you by the Spin-off Podcast Network in collaboration with KiwiBank. Available now wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year and plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
Nau mai hoki mai ki other fold, e mihi nei, ko Duncangree tōku ingoa. My guest today, Toby Manhire, is going to join me to talk about just the recap of the week in media as we do on a Tuesday. We're going to run through the results season for the big media companies is now in the books. NZME and TVNZ were the last to come in. So we'll sort of top line that, less about the kind of line by line. That's something we might save for when Glenn Kine returns, but more about the sort of what are the big truths that are now starting to become evident within media. I'm going to talk about. I went out on Friday, so that's obviously really interesting. Yeah. But I want to talk about, it's a new venue, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about the role of cultural infrastructure and how in how a country can kind of put on a show. Well, there's been some feedback on where the audience is from a couple of people who've made some interesting points that I want to address, and then particularly look into a related topic, which is the sort of slide in ratings for public radio, which seems to be, Shane had a piece about that on Friday, but that seems to be a worldwide topic. And then finally, a couple of quick hits on some international topics, the banning of X in Brazil, the arrest of Telegram's founder in France, and a legitimately really funny story about how not to use Chat GPT that's come out of the film business. But welcome, Toby.
Kia ora, hello.
So it's good to have you here. So as I mentioned, the sort of results are in the books for all the big media companies. The most recent ones kind of speak to two different themes in a way. So NZME had essentially like a flat year. It's reporting its half yearly results, which by comparison to the first half of 23, the revenues were essentially flat, and EBITDA more or less the same, eking out a very slight gain, which doesn't sound great, but by comparison to TVNZ, which registered a loss of 85 million versus a 1.7 million profit the year before, largely driven by a $62 million write-down in asset values, but also by a $39 million drop in revenue, largely as a result of advertising. That mirrors a similar big drop for Warner Brothers Discovery. And I guess we're just starting to see this kind of that advertising as a business model, irrespective of what the media form is pretty hard work.
Yeah, it's hard work, and especially if you've got many of your eggs in one basket, that then that cliff is steeper when you hit it. I think TVNZ has done some really impressive things. TVNZ Plus has been rightly lauded, and they're doing another overhaul of that now. But they've still had as the golden goose the primetime TV advertising has been their main revenue source, and that's really plummeted.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting, right, is that TV ratings have been in structural decline for close to a decade now. They've been going down, particularly in that sort of coveted younger viewer market, but that hasn't been matched by declines in revenue. They've been kind of decoupled. This year, ratings actually haven't gone down by as much as they, had been going down, and in some cases, more in the last few weeks, they've even ticked up a little bit. But there's just been this vast explosion, a big crater where advertising revenue used to be. When you think about and there's been speculation about, okay, should we go into further into sports and start a subscription product? What do you think the sort of politics of TVNZ as a state-owned institution moving into a sort of a paywall subscription type model are?
I think that the one thing that is clear is that they need to diversify their revenue streams. And there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not, for example, they could have an ad-free version of TVNZ Plus. There are other examples. You scroll through the content on there, and there are a bunch of quite good movies on there. There's some really, really good ones.
That's true.
And they don't have a pay TV option that you would on a Neon or an Apple, where you can say, I want that newer movie and I'll pay $8 for it, as we did last night to watch The Fall Guy. Why not? And why can't they have like a Video Easy bargain basket $2 video stream where, those sorts of things? At the moment, those options aren't there. It makes sense to introduce them, it seems to me.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because they've talked about having this sort of technical debt where they're going to need to spend $100 million or thereabouts to kind of build a new platform, which seems like a lot of money. It'll be nothing compared to what the really big players are spending, but also, a lot of these problems shouldn't be that complicated. But as you say, it doesn't have to necessarily be just a pure paywall product. There's also room for pay-per-view. You can imagine something like the Black Clash potentially. Some of these sort of tentpole events that they're starting to put together. Could you start to do a pay-per-view model and just have a broader revenue mix? It doesn't have to be one thing. But yeah, do you think that, especially with a national government in power, or coalition, national-led coalition in power, do you foresee? How do you think that they would respond to the idea of TVNZ kind of walking down that path?
Probably more warmly than the Labour government might have, insofar as having a user pays element will probably be less frightening for them. It's this weird thing, TVNZ, that it's publicly owned and almost entirely operating on a commercial basis, with a few small exceptions in the newsroom. Takata Pacifica, Q&A, publicly funded, but for the most part, it operates in the commercial space. Delivers a dividend some years, others doesn't. And it does, you do sometimes stop and wonder, what is the rationale for its public ownership? And one that I don't mean to be glib, but it is in an emergency, you have a way of reaching people. Otherwise, it's been a thing that's gone back and forth over the years. You remember when there was TVNZ6 and TVNZ7, and those seem to me to operate in quite an interesting way, or on the side where you could develop ideas and develop talent. But TVNZ at the time didn't like the idea of its own being cannibalized from, so it didn't really back it. It didn't even promote it barely at all on its main channels.
Yeah, well, that was the charter era, right? And I think the mentality at TVNZ was, if everything goes well and those, there's a finite size to the audience. And if those channels are spectacularly popular, it moves them from places where we can sell a bunch of ads versus to places that we can't. My understanding that TVNZU, which was another really cool experiment that they had a few years earlier, part of the reason that eventually got shut down is because, again, it was seen as cannibalizing TVNZ2, which at the time was a really good revenue driver for them. That sort of, there was an interview with the outgoing head of Treasury this morning by Janae Tibshraeny, who basically talked about, the New Zealand government is uncommonly present in the commercial sector, but compared to a lot of similar economies, and TVNZ is sometimes identified as a thing that is odd for a government to own. historically it might have got quite a lot of money. Now it probably, that's the irony, is that it's probably your argument is easy to make now, but the revenue you'd realise is much lower.
For sure, and it was a thing that came up during the discussions about the merger RIP, which was how do you achieve a hybrid model? That is to say, one where certain parts of your operation are commercially driven and other parts of it you have a ring-fenced public interest mandate as a public good. And people would look to like RTE in Ireland as an example of that, and they've had all sorts of problems. But, it's interesting that now when times are bad, it's a different conversation. That when the merger went through, times were strangely in the afterglow of investment of money from COVID and a pickup in certain markets, that they were much stronger. Now it's quite a good time, and you could say, for example, TV2 should be a commercial station. TV1, I don't know. I don't know if anyone's got the appetite for those sorts of restructures at this point.
Yeah, I think the hard thing is that TVNZ, one, would drive vastly the largest share of revenue. So you take that away, and that's how the whole thing is really funded. Totally. But fundamentally, like I do think that it's that conversation is just going to get louder and louder over, and it won't take that long because that's just a really, really large loss, even irrespective of the write down and that it was a bad advertising year. You can't last.
Yeah, I mean, it was at the less terrible end of a terrible expectation of a loss, wasn't it?
Like exactly.
But it wasn't. I mean, the mood music had been there in appalling, in really difficult ways for people working there, which is to say they lost colleagues, they've lost programs that were much loved, and so there was a slight worry. And you hear rumours circulating all the time. There are some more things going to be announced at TVNZ. The results didn't come with anything that was beyond the miserable state of things, did it?
No, absolutely. Except for a signal that there were more hard decisions to come, essentially. Whereas NZME, by contrast, had a hard time of it, but still managed to kind of essentially have their EBITDA the same as the previous period. Which, given what we know about this really subdued commercial market, is pretty impressive. That's largely been driven by an uplift on the digital side, some uplift in digital advertising, but particularly around subscriptions and OneRoof, which I think turned its first profit as well. You look at Sky. Sky, its share price fell because its customer numbers were down 7.5%. Largely driven by a big drop in neon, but it's still really robustly profitable because the vast bulk of its revenue comes from subscribers, and advertising has been something they've neglected for a long time. They're starting to get better at, but that's the story.
An interesting in terms of the necessity not to have your revenue all coming from one direction. So Sky has been looking more at free to air, and it's now got Sky Open, which replaces Prime. It's been looking more at advertising coming in. It's got the New Zealand rugby deal that is up for renegotiation at the moment, and it looks like there'll be some cutting of cloth there. Meanwhile, over at NZME, talking about diversifying your revenue streams, OneRoof is such an important part of that puzzle, because if you look at Domain in Australia, which is now, I think it's now a listed company, but majority owned by Nine over there, formerly Fairfax, is such a crucial part of your revenue pie. And if I think they're now challenging Trade Me on the property fund, or they're in the mix, right?
They're in the mix. It's hard to say. Like the actual total revenue attributed to it is relatively, it's not trivial. It's like $13 million, but you'd think Trade Me's would be their equivalent. When they were last publicly traded, it would have been. I'm not sure if they broke out property, but you'd have to think that that's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars. But the point is, they're building this thing and making headway, and it's a forever project, and the fact that they're making progress, but it's also a subdued housing market.
So being well set, and I think that kind of is microcosm for overall. For a result like this, all of it has to come frame within a reality, which is things are tough out there. And so for NZME to meet its advertising targets is hella impressive. They've got a pretty mean machine running there. People who work at NZME aren't massively surprised. There isn't that sort of sense of jeopardy that happens in some other organisations. They've now got the premium model running smoothly. If anything, they probably should have turned it on earlier. But you look at the and that's in part a way of transitioning your print audience over to a paying digital audience, which is what sits underneath a lot of what's happened finally at Stuff too. You know, people who go, I no longer want the paper on a Thursday. Can you transition them to a premium product? And ZB and the rest of the radio portfolio seem to be humming. I mean, it's become a bit of a boring thing to say that radio is the survivor in the media market, but they seem to have those things operating really smoothly.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to transition into talking about public radio, because two things are true. One is that, and we saw this in, I heard from Alistair Jamieson, who's the head of the Radio Broadcast Association, in the aftermath of, my not snide, but certainly expressing a slight arched eyebrow at the fact that radio just persistently reports a small gain in listenership every single survey. It's eerie. There aren't many things in media that are that stable, but radio appears to be.
What are you implying?
What I'm implying is that, look, sometimes if you're the person paying the person who's surveying you, that both sides have a vested interest in achieving a particular result. What Alistair, who I respect and like and know reasonably well, is saying is that if that's true, it's also true in Australia and in the US, and tellingly, where the audience is, that the radio listenership was one of the few forms of media anywhere that was ticking up. But the thing I wanted to chat about with you is that there's this other thing that's running in parallel, and that public radio. So in New Zealand, that's Radio New Zealand, RNZ. In Australia, that's the ABC, and in the US, that's NPR, is all kind of going down, both its listenership and its proportion of overall listening. And I wondered if you would have seen in Media Insider, Shane Curry interviewing Paul Thompson, who, while talking about, and rightly so, that the RNZ multiverse is bigger than just radio now, it's still not acceptable or desirable for radio to be going down as proportionally anyway. I wondered if you had what your thoughts were on that, or a theory of why that might be happening around the world.
Well, I haven't seen those numbers, but I imagine part of it is to do with a post-COVID thing, in that a lot of people in times of crisis tune into what they think is the authoritative, the reliable, the trustworthy, the kind of establishment sources, whether it's the BBC or the ABC or NPR or here RNZ. And perhaps as we move back to something closer to, God forbid, normalcy, or people maybe there's a little bit of fatigue with all of that stuff. We've had such a tumultuous period of time around the world. So that might be part of it, I suppose. For RNZ, I think they need to diversify their output, and they would acknowledge that, and Paul Thompson acknowledges that. There must still be some bruising from what happened when that youth network was proposed. At that point, they had far less money, and so they were trying to do it, and it was putting it, of course, as you remember, on the Concert FM frequency, and then there was a uproar, I think it's fair to say, led by Helen Clark, and it became a political issue, and it was messily handled, but it probably left some scars that made it harder to kind of overhaul. Because I do think there is a reasonable argument that the kind of Route 1 output of RNZ, which is their, I was going to say the national program, RNZ National, that's still its trunk, right?
Yeah.
And it feels a bit stuck sometimes, and you kind of think where are the? I mean, it's good to have Emile Donovan in the nights, because it seems to me that's the kind of place where you should be blooding your talent. But there isn't been a lot of career development. It's great to have Mihirangi Forbes on the radio on Saturday morning with another talent, Susie Ferguson. Was that done because they got a big whiteboard out and thought, what's the most exciting and innovative thing we can do? It's put 2 people on the Saturday morning show? I don't think so. That was done as a workaround to deal with other issues. And so you kind of go, where's the big picture vision of what it looks like? And it's hard because other territories have more options. For example, in the UK, the BBC has a bunch of different radio stations, and it can move people around. It can use Radio 5 Live as a ground for fledgling broadcasters and move them. It can use Radio 2, and then it can put its Radio 4. It can put Radio 4 presenters out to pasture on Radio 2 or whatever, But it seems a bit stuck to me.
Yeah, look, I would sort of echo that. I mean, there's on some level, it's sort of a weird thing to say, because RNZ is probably, certainly in terms of audio, the channel brand that I consume the most. Power user of its app, particularly Morning Report. That's kind of how I start my morning, is just picking through those stories. So there's a reason for that. It still feels like on some level if you've listened to that, then you kind of have a decent sense of what's going on in New Zealand, and it's maybe the best way of doing that still to my mind. Yet at the same time, I totally agree. There is a sense that it just hasn't evolved, that the programs are, unless I'm very much mistaken, largely as they were in the 90s.
Yeah.
And some of the tonal approach hasn't evolved massively since then either.
I mean, they've introduced, like, First Up with Nathan Ararere, who I think is fantastic.
I love
think
that show.
He's a real
talent.
blast of light.
But it's 5 till 6 a.m.
It's 5 to 6 a.m. So what you do, it seems to, and remembering, RNZ has been underfunded for a long time, but they do now have $25 million more a year, there or thereabouts. And when you talk to people, it's like there's a lot of infrastructural shit to do, and I understand that. There's a lot of, the whole app needs rebuilding, I understand that, the whole digital side. There's a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily audience facing. Having said that, it seems to me one of the really interesting, exciting things you could do, for example, which would reflect things that happen overseas, is take your flagship show, Morning Report, with the terrific Corrindan, Ingrid Hipkins, who, by the way, has vastly improved and turned into a really good broadcaster, I think.
She's amazing. Hipkiss, but
what did I say?
You said Ingrid Hipkins.
Who's that?
I assume that's Chris Hipkins' sister.
Oh, that's Chris's sister.
Yeah,
Ingy.
lovely.
Apologies, Ingrid Hipkins. Add a third presenter, and extend the show a bit, and rotate them, and introduce a daily feature interview that goes for 12 minutes, or actual proper as agenda setting. You have your broadcast. It's incredibly hard work to be doing that every day. So they go on a rota, and they get some time to prepare and come in and do, just to kind of energize it a bit and give it a fresh sense of, what, we're going to set the agenda every day. And I think that was doing something like that is the only way that you'll give Mike Hosking and that machine, which is so good, so well produced. He's so in his element. He gets the tone so right. He knows his onions, but also knows how to do his kind of breakfast radio commercial stuff. That's the only way that I think that you'll give them fright.
Yeah, I mean, which I think absolutely is something they could and should do. The other thing that feels to me like a missed opportunity, and still is that the podcast space, they've obviously done well with a whole range of sort of generalist shows, but RNZ is news content and magazine content. It's news on Checkpoint and Morning Report. It's magazine, probably the bulk of the rest of the offer. And yet in the podcast space, it's almost all in the magazine type area, with the exception of the Detail, which is a collaboration with Newsroom. I think in both in terms of talent ID and in terms of just what they could have really stolen a march on. But they've always been fantastic at audio. They could have really pressed home in terms of having packaged, maybe even sort of targeting younger demographics with a whole suite of audio products, they could also be pushing, is YouTube a big priority for them? That's a massive audience there. You don't get the feeling that those distributed social spaces, which are hard to play in for commercial media, largely because of revenue reasons. So right now, the distribution side of RNZ is really taking text-based stories, putting them on other, on the likes of Stuff and the New Zealand Herald to achieve their, that's how they're getting their audience inflation. To me, that what you're doing is duplicative of a lot of reporting that's happening elsewhere, whereas social spaces, doing news in those spaces, big audiences, underserved audiences for news, that's a big opportunity.
Well, it's interesting. You pick up a copy of the ODT these days.
The RNZ ODT.
Well, in the Otago Daily Times, a fantastic, long-standing broadsheet newspaper, and boy, oh boy, there is a lot of RNZ content in there. I'm not sure if their contract with NZ Herald has lapsed yet, but it was certainly going to at some point, that arrangement, and there was quite a bit of NZ Herald content in there before then. A lot of RNZ, and in some ways, thank God for RNZ, because they're starting to provide a proxy version of NZPA almost,
Sure.
And I think you'd put that together with LDR, the Local Democracy Reporting Network, which is funded from New Zealand On Air. Fantastic service in a small way, sort of plugging some holes in the local reporting area. And so I think that's all valuable work, but it's sort of separate still from that core output that RNZ is responsible for.
Whoa. Landing an account this big will totally change my landscaping business. It's going to mean hiring more guys and more equipment and new trucks for the new guys to drive the new equipment in. I don't know if I'm ready.
You can do this, and Ford Pro FinSimple can help. Our experts are ready to make growing pains less painful for your business with flexible financing solutions that meet the needs of your business today when you need them. Get started at fordpro.com/financing.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
So just moving on to my Friday night.
Yeah, good.
Really important. Buried the lead, really.
You wrote a big piece all day on Friday, and then you finished a draft.
Correct.
Is that right? Then you felt a level of unshackling, and
I
you went
did.
out. You went out on the town.
I did.
Did you put your town shoes on?
I didn't. No, it's the kind of venue where town shoes wouldn't have been particularly well received. I went to Double Whammy, which is a very new venue, reviewed on the spin-off by Gabby Ladier's. It's essentially like the combining of two neighbouring venues, both of them very long-standing, on Karangahape Road. One was the Wine Cellar, and one is Whammy Bar, and they basically have sort of knocked down a wall and created a new space between the two and called it Double Whammy. Whammy was, has been a venue forever. It was like a dance. It was a club called Calibre back in the day, and there's been spaces before that too. But it's probably like a good, I'm just guessing here, like a 150 to 200 people is a really good time in Whammy. That's still there. The Wine Cellar, which was like a sort of I guess it's a dive bar-y kind of folky
Beloved
thing.
but aging.
That's right. And a few different spaces where you could play, but in like a sort of a room which is somehow nominally outside, so you can smoke in it, and it's just it was just a mishmash of different spaces. But what they've done is put this big 500 cap rectangular box in the middle, very utilitarian. But
I can't imagine where you would get that 500 space, but I believe you.
I appreciate that. I think it used to be like a combination of maybe some storage, some backstage.
Okay, cool.
But it's a big rectangle, and the way that they had it set up at the sort of Going Global after party on Friday was they called it triple whammy because you had the normal stage at one end, but also a kind of a makeshift stage at another, and they played it like a festival where as soon as one band, like the final chord would still be ringing out, and then someone would pick up, which was a really cool vibe. And I saw Phoebe Rings and Brandon Shiraz, Softbait, Swallow the like every
Ingrid Hipkins, she's good.
She's really good. I actually did see Guy and Espiner there. Speaking of, he's out.
Yeah.
But they like the bands were fantastic. The vibe was incredible. It was packed. And
is this filling a gap in the market for capacity? Because it's always that sense of the vibrancy of a town sometimes depends on, whether you can attract acts or whether you can have a place for bands that are touring even locally. What is that? So 500, that fills a gap, doesn't it? That's like a King's Arms space.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's really what I'm getting at with this whole cultural infrastructure idea. So it is and it isn't filling a gap. That was the King's Arms size. And ironically, I walked there from the old King's Arms because a friend of mine has an apartment on that site. So that's what you want the city to be too, is a place where there's density. But
walking is quite unusual in Auckland, though. People probably like looking out their cars and gazing at you and thinking, what is that guy doing?
Go back to Wellington, loser, just that sort of thing. But there is a 500 cap venue, which is Tuning Fork, part of Spark Arena, but it's not got a lot of vibe. It does feel a little bit like you're partying in a conference room. It's got windows all down one side. It unavoidably feels like it's part of what it is, which is part of a big kind of corporate arena setting. Whereas this is very much your sort of underground, windowless, dive bar kind of situation. And so the kinds of bands which naturally play a 500 capacity divey venue, which are often bands on their way up to somewhere like the Power Station, which is more like 1,000. It's really important to have something like that. And the people, who run Double Whammy, Lucy McRae, Tom Anderson, I'm probably missing some, they're absolute lifers. They're the right people to be running that kind of infrastructure in this country and in the city. And Auckland is just so much better for having that out there, is what I'd say.
Yeah, and in Wellington there's a new venue run by the Meow people, which is Meow is a much loved bar that's used as a venue for a bunch of different things, including some spin-off events we've had there. And they've got a new space called Meow Nui, which I think has been delayed in opening, and it's in an old church on Taranaki Street. I'm looking at TI here as a sort of, a fellow kind of former Wellingtonian thinking, and someone who knows lots of stuff, and he's just giving me an empty gaze.
You're on your own there, Toby.
Apologies to Wellingtonians for TI here's lack of research on this particular issue. But it's been a thing in Wellington for a long time. It's like there's San Fran and then there's these, but where is that mid-sized venue that can get you those acts? Can also be something for, your local bands to upgrade to or to come back to. Just having that good mix of venues, whether it's music or a bunch of different events, is such an important part of the fabric of a exciting place to live, I think.
Yeah, and I sort of, it's funny, right? Because you think about, like we spend, it's probably like a pittance by international standards, but it's millions of dollars in various ways funding the arts, whether that's music, much more so we're recorded music and music videos and so on. But the infrastructure space is kind of left to councils a bit, and they tend to have it feels like they do more in theatre than they do in music. Like it's kind of a mess of the market and the government and local government. And look, that's probably appropriate, but it does, if something is missing, if there is a missing piece in whether it's 2,000, 3,300, a whole, it's promoters, audiences, artists on the come up. There's just all these people who miss out and can't really operate. And if there's a great venue that has got the right operator and there's a lot of trust there, the whole city benefits. And, I don't think there's there are definitely things a city can probably do to encourage it. I'm sure that there are things that Auckland could, but I just wanted to say that having been there on Friday, I was so impressed, and think that as that thing sort of starts to kind of get momentum and bookings, it's going to be a real asset to the city. Okay, couple of things internationally. It's been quite a year of after a sort of probably 20 years of big tech really being having it all its way. Not entirely so, but that's broadly been true. This year has felt like there's been started to be more and more of a regulatory pushback. You've seen that with some of the kind of hearings around generative AI. You've seen that with the recent decision in the US courts that Google's a monopoly. This week we saw two. They're not the very top tier platforms, but really big, kind of important platforms in different ways, having some issues. A judge in Brazil blocking X and the founder of Telegram being arrested in France. You're a big Telegram guy, or you have been at various times, as largely for reporting reasons. Do you want to just tell us what's happened there, and what Telegram's really like? Because I've literally never set foot in it.
Search my name on Telegram, you'll find it often appears alongside a noose, which is nice.
That's nice.
But that speaks to some of the content on Telegram, and Telegram was very proud of its status as a free speech space, untrammeled by the incursions of the state censors and all that sort of stuff. And that its founder, Pavel Durov, I think his name is, was arrested in Paris the other day. He's a French citizen, but essentially Telegram has not been meeting a bunch of requirements, alleges the court, in terms of things like allowing content, not just violent extremism, but child pornography, which is the sort of area where you can pretty much get universal agreement on when you're discussing free speech. You have to be a kind of fully out there free speech extremist to be comfortable with that, and I think almost nobody would do that. But then at the same time, you've got Elon Musk in Brazil, as you mentioned, and that one's a bit more complicated in how it's locked into the political, judicial things. But I think it's at least ostensibly to do with Twitter's refusal to have lawyers present in Brazil and that requirement under their law. The broader sweep of it all, as you say, is the sense of a tide shift. The Google antitrust stuff that's going on is the big kahuna amongst it all, whether or not Google will be required to break up, whether or not Meta at some point might have to break up. You've got a rare point of agreement between the Democrats and the Republicans on this, because the case at Google now, I'm pretty sure that started under Trump.
It did.
And so there is a sense of, it's a couple of things. It's first of all this idea that they hung on to for so long, that these were just some tech bros in hoodies in their university dorms doing some coding, and like, hey, we're just, and now we're in Silicon Valley, and look, we've got a slide in our office. How about that, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you look back and you go, oh my God, these are the biggest companies in the world, and these are the biggest publishers in the world, and they're pretending not to be publishers, some of them in the case of Facebook, which for so long attempted to push back against any idea that it was a publisher. Now, it wouldn't say that in quite so straightforward terms now, but there was a time when it was just, that's all we're doing, all we are, and it goes back to, you look at Mega in the case with Kim.com, which has returned to prominence with Paul Goldsmith, the Justice Minister, saying, off you go, mate, which will be subject to judicial review, presumably. Anyway, it's that sense of the platform neutral thing versus the government's going, oh, hang on a minute, because the second part of it is the extent to which those companies attach themselves to free speech principles, often because that's what they genuinely believed, and that is the case, often because that was much more conducive to business success. The incursions of the state aren't welcome in those sorts of terms. But it is an interesting point in time, and people have different views on how far you want it to go. Like, you might look at the case in Brazil as a fuck you, Elon, this is good, people are pushing back against you. You might look at it as what if this was a government I disagreed with, and you look at China, for example, where all these things are banned. You look at you look at Russia, etc. But it is a really interesting time, as you say, in terms of that general direction of travel.
Yeah, I have kind of complicated feelings about it in a way, and in part because, the real, Brazil is the fifth biggest X market outside of the US.
Twitter/X.
Twitter/X.
It's not a former market. It's still a market.
It's still a market.
It could have been misunderstood. That's part of the problem. Sorry, Karen.
That's true. But but it's they're power users of social media. I think one of, if not the biggest users of social media in the world. So this is it's extremely material, and I do think that a lot of the things that Elon Musk has done since taking over Twitter are, there's just all kinds of problems with them. Telegram, all the reporting I've read suggests that the child sexual abuse material that has been on there, they were just willfully ignoring it. All of the other platforms take this stuff really seriously, try really hard, don't always succeed, but it's manifestly a real priority for them. So, good that they're both being targeted, but it still does feel like there are these just known, hiding in plain sight, not even hiding, just right there in front of you, issues with all of the big platforms, from the way that sort of Google prioritizes its own products to the lack of transparency around the way that sort of Meta develops its products. There's just like this, and just the tax situation more broadly, which just kind of creeps along with these OECD negotiations, and it still feels like we're years away from getting to a really intelligent discussion about how we can regulate them. And every year that passes, they're getting billions of tax-free dollars that they're just pumping into developing the products, and the kind of imbalance not just between traditional media and the tech platforms, that's largely over, I think, but between nation states and tech platforms becomes more and more impossible to imagine rebalancing. And so, and we've kind of been here before. I'm sure that in the late 1890s, early 1900s, during the kind of Standard Oil, kind of Cornelius Vanderbilt type era, it was unimaginable that these monopolies would ever be broken down until suddenly Sherman comes along, and they are. But it does feel right now there's a combination of the transnational nature of them, how integrated they are into our lives, and just the enormous scale, and yet the sort of invisibility of them makes this a pretty hard one to solve. Let's end on
If you go onto Telegram, you'll learn that there is a global government being built as we speak, so that will probably take care of it. So it should be fine. Okay,
that's actually a huge relief. Finally, this is a really funny story, which I was alluded to by Ben Evans, one of my favourite writers on technology. And he just simply, the link simply said, ChatGPT is not a search engine. So what happened was a trailer came out for, can you pronounce it? Megalopolis?
Megalopolis.
Yeah. 40 plus years in the making. Francis Ford Coppola
filmic vanity project by Francis.
It sounds insane.
Good on him.
Absolutely. We need more of that.
Come on, Francis.
But there was a trailer came out, and look, this is going to be a divisive film. It's probably not going to be a hit, but we need more feats of epic folly in this world. I agree with you there. the point of the trailer was that Francis Ford Coppola, who's the director of the Godfather trilogy, Apocalypse Now, a whole bunch of films which have been sometimes divisive at the time, but ultimately ended up being hailed as masterpieces. It had all these quotes from really eminent film critics, like Pauline Kael, the longtime Times critic, just kind of panning his masterpieces. And Bill Jaberi, who's a film critic for New York Magazine, sort of saw them and thought, just something didn't seem quite right. Like, and so went and looked up the original reviews and couldn't find a source for not just one of them, but any of them. And then Deadline followed up by asking them, what happened? Where did these quotes come from? And apparently it was an independent marketer who'd found them using ChatGPT. ChatGPT had just sort of helpfully created these quotes, which never have existed. And it is kind of, it's both funny and small. They fired the marketer, but it also does speak to the limits of what you can and can't use ChatGPT for.
Right, because ChatGPT is not a search engine is a fine thing to say. I mean, it is. Like it is, increasingly generative AI is being baked into search engines. I think Google now returns something like 15 to 20% of its results as, what's the term they use for it, where it's essentially Google Zero, they call it. It's not, you don't have to click through to anything else because it's providing you with automated results. And some of those have been shown to be wrong quite routinely. It is really normal when you use these different services to sometimes find errors when you're not searching for them. When you're trying to search for them, like when you say, how many N's are there in banana, and it will confidently tell you 3 or whatever. Those are classic examples. But also much more kind of workaday examples of that. And they've got all of these companies that are, got these massive valuations now working around the clock to try and address these things. What I don't understand well enough about the technology is whether it's something that you can whether you can correct in waves, or whether it's really like someone going in and checking in the wiring on banana, doing all these things bit by bit. Because if so, that's a kind of endemic, huge threat to the role of these. Because it's all, there's a lot of party tricks involved. There's all this sort of stuff. But really, you really start to get your value out of generative AI when it's baked into search.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a sort of a range of theories about how generative AI will ultimately evolve. Like, will it just be sitting there just beneath the surface of a whole bunch of products we use, or will it just be a single God product that does everything for us? And, I absolutely, like you, singularly unqualified to answer that question, but it did seem to me instructive about this idea that just because you can use it as, like, we're used to using search in a wild variety of ways. We call it search, but it's also shopping and navigation and a whole bunch of other things. But certain aspects of what we use it for search are because when you search for something conventionally, using the sort of standard approach, you search for something, you scan the links. Google should have surfaced those that are most trafficked and therefore hopefully most reliable, and then you use a bit of your own sort of mental model to say whether this thing passes the sniff test. And if it's all happening on the one page, you just don't, maybe there's some citations, but you don't have the same ability to kind of give it that test. So that basically makes me more inclined to think that it's going to be in a lot of products rather than it's going to be the one product.
Well, it's just to take a simple example that I, in my working life, encountered last week, I think it was.
Because you're a big Gen AI user now.
I wouldn't say big. I probably use ChatGPT and I use Claude, and sometimes I mess around with the other ones, and I use them in my work probably a couple of times a day for various things. But let me give you an example. We are coming up to the 10th anniversary of the spinoff.co.nz.
Oh, shit. Crazy.
And partly for a joke thing, although perhaps it doesn't seem like a funny query, I asked ChatGPT and Claude both to give me a list of prominent New Zealanders who have died over the last decade.
Oh, yeah. Good question. Classic search.
The sort of thing that Gen AI can perhaps perform more effectively. I mean, I could get it to write me an obituary for each of them if I wanted to. So there are other applications.
There might be a Wikipedia page, but yeah.
I think I asked for 20, and ChatGPT gave me 2 people who had not died, and I knew they hadn't died. And then you say to it, I'm pretty sure XY is not, and they go, oh, my apologies, you're right.
Yeah.
And so they believe you. You could say, I didn't try this, but I might have been able to say, if the XY has been reincarnated, and they'd probably say, I'm sorry, the way they do that. But the funny version of it, and I think this probably is an example of it doing a little bit of self-correcting along the way somewhere in it, is I think it was Claude. I asked it for this list, and it included the list, and on the list was Graham Henry.
Oh,
and it had in brackets after Graham Henry. Graham Henry has not died, but is a prominent enough New Zealander to include on this list anyway. It's like you're such an important New Zealander that you'll be included on a list of those who have died despite being alive. And that's just one of those. I mean, it's a small, trivial example, but these are the kind of gremlins we're dealing with.
In some ways, I kind of hope they don't fix it. Not only because I feel like because it's quite a scary technology, but also because that's funny.
Yeah, but you can imagine that if you're in a hurry working on a really small local website somewhere and you want to do an end of year obituary thing and say, generate me 400 words on 6 New Zealanders who have died this year, or 6 kind of people in New Zealand snooker community who have, and they do that for you, and you put unless you're checking it, and this is getting to a boring different subject. The key thing when you talk to people about this is really it's most useful when you provide it with the information.
Yeah.
And it still works in that way, generative AI, and you see examples of that. Like I was at this conference in Manila where there was a lot of talk about AI, and one of the most interesting examples of it was Rappler did this massive project where they've got in like local elections, a bit like our policy thing that we've run here, the brilliant thing, where they used AI to generate, I think it was 35,000 candidate summaries based on the information that those candidates have provided. But if you're asking it to go out to the World Wide Web, beware.
Look, that's a great note to end on. Thanks so much for coming on The Fold, Toby.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be selected from a wide range of people who were sitting right beside you when you needed to go. And
to be fair, this morning you were sitting right next to one of the hosts of Media Watch. And I chose you.
Well, that's true. No, you chose me before he came in.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's also true.
Complicated
but
to
still,
get him in here talking about
I would definitely have considered a peer review.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, Toby. Thanks, I hear.
We started doing a pipeha.
I don't know where I'm from.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check with the chef.
Takeout Kids, a coming-of-age documentary series returns for Season 2. From a Thai restaurant to a dairy to a nail salon, 5 young people balance school and relationships while growing up in their families' shops.
Are you working tomorrow?
I go to school.
Watch Takeout Kids on the spin-off today, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spin-off Podcast Network.